First panel.
Hi everyone, good morning and welcome to our members conference. It's genuinely lovely to see you all here. I think we need this conference more than ever. So I'm very proud to be a part of Another Europe is Possible, and this morning we're going to start off with a discussion where we're asking what next for the internationalist left, how do we win across borders? And I'm genuinely excited and very delighted to welcome our awesome panel. So we have Clive Lewis, who is a Labour MP for Norwich South and has been one of the most eloquent and consistent supporters of Another Europe and causes like free movement within Labour in recent years. Thank you, Clive, for all the work that you do. Natalie Bennett is a former leader of the Green Party of England and Wales and is now a member of the House of Lords, where she is leading the charge on a range of progressive causes. Welcome, Natalie. Henry Chango Lopez is the newly elected General Secretary of the Independent Workers of Great Britain, the IWGB. Congratulations, Henry. His efforts and the union's efforts are very much noted in organising precarious and migrant workers, and you're an inspiration in relation to the work that you do, so thank you very much. We're also very excited to have Dorota Kawęcka, who is a Polish feminist and a parliamentary candidate for Razem. So thank you for being here. And we also have Liza, Merliak, who is the International Secretary of the Belarusian Independent Trade Union, and one of the representatives of the organised labour who is resisting the dictatorship in Belarus. So thank you so much for being here. We know it's been a very hard year for everyone, and so we really appreciate you being here. And today is all about solidarity and action. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Clive to open the panel with your points.
Thank you, Shasta. It's a pleasure to be here today and to see so many people come to listen and to take part in this debate. It's fantastic. So, I'll start off very quickly. Obviously, today is the anniversary of when we were reading from the proverbial gut punch that was the general election. I'll leave everyone here to make their own comments on where we are as a party a year later. Today, I'm going to talk about what I think we need to be aiming for, which is the transformation and democratization of our politics and economy. And I'll also touch on how we might start making some steps in that direction. So where are we right now? What's the current situation? Well, we're facing and staring at multiple cliff edges, or perhaps dangling off the edge of the cliff is probably a more suitable kind of image to have in your mind, hanging on by the fingernails. We've had the pandemic. More than 1 million people around the world have died, millions more have been infected, and many are living with long-term health conditions. Inequalities have been entrenched, both domestically and internationally. Public procurement has become a corrupt get-rich scheme for cronies. Rich countries like the UK are hoarding vaccines to protect big pharma's potential profits and intellectual property rights. And we have an economic recession looming as a result, one the Tories are going to try and blame entirely on COVID, when the reality is an increasingly likely no-deal Brexit, which is what they want, will cause more damage than even COVID has. That means Labour must not make the mistake of making no deal, if it happens, about the incompetent and failing negotiation skills of this government. It must link this deliberate act with its motive, which is deregulation and a march to the bottom. The key question we should be asking is, which bit of the level playing field do you want to change? And I think that's what we need to be asking them. The other cliff edges. So we're in the midst of an ecological breakdown, which scientists have linked to the emergence of COVID-19. Biodiversity is collapsing. Our food chains are collapsing. This is made worse by the climate crisis. The cause has been known for decades, but there's been an international failure to take the action required. We're also experiencing the rise of AI and surveillance capitalism. It's the tech giants of Silicon Valley. Democracy is an obstacle to competing with Chinese firms which benefit from the Chinese state's authoritarian push in this area. And we also now face an openly racist and authoritarian conservative government with a massive majority, and they know how to keep and win power. And these kind of governments now are operating all across the Western world and beyond. We've got speakers from Poland and other countries, Hungary. We know this authoritarian right is something that we need to discuss today, and I'm sure we will. So I think if you look at, I just want to very quickly touch on this government as well. If you look at what they're doing on human rights, there's going to be a review on the Human Rights Act. There's going to be a judicial review, and they're also going to be looking at access to voting without the barrier of presenting ID. So we can see these attacks taking place in our democracy as well. I personally believe that the root cause of all these problems is the failure of established institutions to represent the public, to challenge economic self-interest in favour of the common good. It's the economic liberalization over the past 40 years. It's just gone hand in hand with a retreat of democracy and a narrowing of our democratic imagination. And this is what has brought us to a so-called new Gilded Age, with a mass accumulation of wealth and power, and that power is increasingly unaccountable. So where do we go? Well, I think we have to confront the root causes of these problems and stop tinkering with the symptoms. The roots are in our current constitutional settlement, and the crisis of democracy is what is causing it. The question that has to define how we move forward is, how do we build and win power in the wider context? Until we win power, we can't make any of the changes that we want and are desperately needed. So a couple of years ago, the author Dan Hines wrote for New Socialist about how the English-speaking left has long neglected questions of constitutional design in seeking material benefits for the working class through the existing institutions of the state. And I think a constitutional design or the democratization of the state as the way of making gains on social and economic justice are not lost on many political movements today. One of Extinction Rebellion's core demands is for power to be given to citizens to decide on what the road to net zero looks like. Abroad, Chileans revolting last year against 40 years of neoliberalism demanded a new constitution that enshrines social and economic equality. So I think we have to think seriously about the kind of state we want, what kind of state will rise to meet the challenges we face, what kind of state will be a vehicle for equality and freedom for all, and how will the state redistribute and decentralize power, and how will it remedy the present implications of the UK's colonial past, something I hope you will touch on today. The state itself has become the site of struggle and transformation. Otherwise, as we saw with the New Labour project, even positive, albeit piecemeal change is only temporary. You know, you can look at EMA, Sure Start centres. These are gone. You know, that was built on a house of sand. So we need to take on the state, and we need to do this. We need to look to the Labour Party, yes, but also beyond, looking outwards. We have to build bridges and help organise and build wider civil society. And that means, you know, campaign groups like Momentum, Another Europe is Possible. I think you've already started sowing the seeds. And I think what we need now is a programme of political education, political organising. You guys know how to do this. And it needs to be on a scale that's big enough and cohesive enough to take on those who have a near unbroken grip on our political system. And I think my final word will be, don't see democracy as a least worst option. Real democracy is virtually absent from the institutions we have right now. Real political and economic democracy are the equality and freedom for all that goes with it. And I think that can be our common cause. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Clive. We don't want you to shut up, but thanks for passing the mic on to our next speaker. It's Liza. If I hand over to you.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I will speak a bit slower than Clive did, because I'm not an English speaker native. Yeah, Another Europe is Possible. You all know that on the 9th of August this year in Belarus there were elections, presidential elections, and straight after those elections we were faced with extreme violence of the riot police against those people who were not voting for the President Lukashenko, but voted for democracy and voted for opportunities, actually. So this violence was stopped actually by workers. We in Belarus have about 4.5 million workers, I mean, in people who work, and the majority of big holistic enterprises are state-owned. So those workers who worked for the state-owned enterprises, they tried to use their position as a leverage to press on the authorities, on the state. So they threatened the authorities with a strike, general strike. However, in the very beginning, in August, it looked like all the working class didn't have experience in collective actions, actually. By 26 years, this country was governed by one and the same person who was oppressing independent union movement. And that is why the strikes were only possible in those enterprises where independent trade unions were. The next attempt to have a strike was on October 26th. And at the moment, we have about 300 workers from different plants that joined the strike. From 4.5 million, we have 300 who are on strike. You might say that this is a very small number and that they don't, they can't bring democracy to this country by striking with this small number of workers. However, at the same time, other workers who didn't join the strike, they voted with their feet. They decided to leave the state Federation of Trade Unions, as the State Federation of Trade Unions amounts about 4 million members, meaning that it's kind of compulsory to be a union member, and the unionization rate in Belarus is about 96%. So the Federation of Trade Unions of Belarus, the state unions, they nominated Alexander Lukashenko to be candidate for the elections on behalf of all the workers of Belarus. And all the workers of Belarus, they didn't vote for Lukashenko. That is why they decided to step off. They are leaving. We can say that there is an extreme outflow of members from the state union federations. We can't actually say that those who leave the state unions immediately join the independent unions. It looks like people don't rely on unions anymore. However, we, the independent unions, try to bring democracy at workplaces of people. So at the moment we are organizing a lot, and we create trade union organizations at the places where they were never before. So we also support those workers who went on strike. By the way, those 300 workers that are on strike, they are members of independent trade unions, especially the Belarusian independent trade unions that I work for, the Union of Miners, Chemical Workers, and Oil Refiners. So as an example of very good cross-border cooperation and cross-border solidarity, I can provide you an example of our cooperation with the Norwegian unions. One of the biggest enterprises that brings a lot of profit to the state is Belarusian. It's the fourth biggest potash producer in the world. We have about 200 miners who went on strike, their political strike. And of course, the management tried to get rid of those who went on strike immediately. However, we were in contact with the Norwegian trade unions, and those who work at the company called Yara International. It's a huge international company producing fertilizers. And it's the biggest European buyer of potash from Belarusian. So we use these ties to put pressure on Belarusian. So at the moment, we're trying to reinstate those workers who were dismissed. We also try to bring the company, the Belarusian company, to the highest standards that are provided by the code of conduct of the Norwegian company. So it looks like we have a leverage here in this situation, in this one particular company. However, there should be, of course, more pressure coming from abroad to make the state change the attitude towards the protesters, for example. Like we have a very sad saying here in Belarus at the moment, that you're not a Belarusian if you were not in prison, or you were not Belarusian if you didn't get a fine. Like even I was taken to the police and I had to pay a fine for taking part in a mass event. Like no, we don't have mass events, they're all forbidden. Even combination of white, red and white clothes on you might bring attention to the police, and you might get a fine for a personal picket or something. Yeah, that is a crazy situation. And of course we need solidarity, and we get the solidarity from both our foreign comrades and from Belarusians who live abroad, like Belarusian diaspora in Great Britain as well. They all do their best to assist us in our fight.
Thank you, Liza, for that very comprehensive overview of what's going on. Obviously, our solidarity is with you and all the workers there, and there's a lot of messages saying exactly that in the chat over here as well. So please do take our greetings and solidarity back from our conference to our comrades there. Henry, we're going to hand over to you next.
Oh, Henry, you're still muted.
Oh, very sorry about this. Yes, I just want to say thank you very much for having me here today. I would like to thank Another Europe is Possible for all the support they have given us in our campaigns. I'm here to talk about, the issues with Brexit and migrant workers. I think this is a very critical situation that we live at the moment, and not just because we represent migrants and precarious workers in a union, but especially with the situation that are happening with the European, with the United Kingdom leaving Brexit, and the problems that this is bringing to migrant workers. We as a union have been campaigning for better conditions for workers, better protection for migrant workers. And it's been a really difficult time at the moment during this pandemic, especially because we have had to fight even more than we were doing before. As you know, we were already fighting for this better treatment and conditions. So this situation basically has exacerbated the problem of migrant workers, with people, not having access to sick pay from cleaners, from foster carers, from private hire drivers, from couriers who are on precarious employment, who work for these massive companies that deprive workers from these conditions. So this has been very problematic for us, and we have had to campaign even more for and put pressure on the government to improve these conditions. As a result of this, recently we had a ruling on our favor, which was taken against the government to implement health and safety directives that come from the European Union to extend for these workers. Most of these workers work in the gig economy, and prior to this, these workers didn't have the opportunity to, to leave the work they were working in unsafe conditions. So basically, that means that by winning this case against the government, these workers can now refuse to work in dangerous and dangerous conditions without the fear of getting sacked. So we are very concerned about what's going to happen after we leave, because of, if this is happening now, we are just concerned about what's going to happen with workers' rights once we leave. So it's going to be very tough times, and I think we need to work together. We're going to need to do more campaigning, more organizing, and I think that is something that we need to do together. At the moment, we are running campaigns, for people to be put on furlough, where companies are refusing to put them, although there is this money available to help them. We have a campaign, for instance, against Italian service, which last year has a turnover of 3 million. We have a campaign for couriers who are being terminated without any process whatsoever, without any warning, with a click of a button, they are sacked from the jobs. So we have a campaign where we are asking people to ask the MPs to put their names on it. So far, we have 60 MPs. We also have campaigns in other universities where we're trying to get workers better conditions. So this is something that we've been doing during this pandemic. It's been a very difficult situation, and I think things are going to become worse. As you know, migrants before were blamed by government that they are the ones who bring down wages, but suddenly they have become key workers. But despite this, they've been neglected from conditions of work that everybody should deserve. Yeah, so that's my thank you.
Thank you, Henry. You're very concise. I'm quite surprised by the fact that everyone's sticking with their times this morning. So thank you very much for all the work that you and the union are doing. We're next going to hand over to Dorota.
Hello, everyone. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk to you today, to share our experiences, my personal experiences and the experiences of the left party Razem in Poland. I am here as the head of the office of the member of the parliament, Daria Gosek-Popiołek, who is one of the 6 parliament members from Razem party. And I've been involved in these recent protests in Poland, both professionally and personally, as a result of my very long engagement in feminist field and activism. And I just wanted to firstly give you a very short overview of the current legislation regarding abortion in Poland, and a brief timeline of the events, because what is happening now is of course not out of the context of the last years. Since 1993 in Poland we have a very strict abortion law. Basically abortion is banned, it's only allowed in 3 cases, and the first case is when it's a threat to women's health and life, and the second is when the pregnancy is a result of an incest or rape, and the third is when there's a severe or irreversible fetus abnormality. And this has been for many years called as a so-called compromise. We often say it's a compromise between the politicians and the church rather than between 2 options. So for many years, there have been many attempts to make it even more strict. And especially after Law and Justice came into power in 2015, these attempts have become more frequent. But the Conservative Party is very, very smart, because they don't do this with their own hands, but they outsource it to civil organizations. And these organizations are, of course, not only in Poland. This is it's a net of organizations in the whole world that are funded by the millionaires. And by the Russian and both Latin American millionaires. And in 2016, this right-wing conservative organization proposed a total abortion ban, which also included persecution of women, of their partners, and of the doctors who helped with the abortion. And this legislation would also result in a police check in the case of miscarriage. So basically, every miscarriage would be treated as not an accident, but probably a case of abortion. And this, once this bill was backed by the Prime Minister and head of the ruling party, Law and Justice, people took to streets. And these protests took 6 months because the bill proposed by this NGO, they had to collect 100,000 signatures. So it took many months. And the peak of these protests, they were called Black protests. And this is also when the women's strike was established. And this is the T-shirt that I'm wearing actually that says women's strike. Was in October 2016 when the ban was not did not go into parliament. So we won at that point, but we didn't realize that it's not over and it's gonna come back in a different way. And then again in 2018, the same organization proposed another bill where they wanted to get rid of one of these 3 cases when abortion was legal. The one concerning the abnormalities of the fetus. And it sounds like it's only one of the 3 cases, but it's actually 98% of abortions that are legal abortions that take place in Poland. So getting rid of this one case basically means a total abortion ban. And this again caused protests, and the bill was rejected in the parliament again. And now in 2020, the year of the pandemic, the year of the rising anti-LGBTI hate speech, of racism, of xenophobia, the ruling party decided to again use someone else's hands to introduce this abortion ban, and they asked the Constitutional Tribunal to check if the current law is constitutional. So they asked if this case of the severe and irreversible fetus abnormalities is legal. And we are not sure if they thought that nobody would notice, or if they thought that it's a sneaky way so people will not protest, because for many years we've been actually defending the Constitutional Tribunal as one of the foundations of our democracy. So once this tribunal says it is illegal, then how can we protest this? But of course the tribunal is also now taken over by the ruling party, so they were quite sure about the result. And of course, the tribunal decided that the abortions in this case are illegal, which caused the current protests and the whole outrage that's been taking almost 2 months. But they got scared actually, because I don't think they expected such scale, because the scale of this protest is much bigger than in 2016, and people are really furious. And they are not afraid to go onto the streets during the pandemic, like in Belarus, of course. Theoretically, the protests are banned, but they are again banned in a way that it's any court would reject, because the law is basically wrongly written. So we do still have the right to take part in demonstrations. So what makes these protests different than in 2016 is that, of course, the scale that I mentioned, the time, because it's almost 2 months, they are much more radical in their narrative, because now we're no longer defending the so-called compromise, but we are actually demanding the access to abortion up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. There's much more cooperation between organizations that would not cooperate before. Also, we have climate justice organizations taking part. Political parties are no longer sort of rejected from the streets. And of course, there are much younger people taking part in it. This is the Generation Z that is really, really present, because 4 years ago they were of course much younger. So now they are here also bringing a new vibe and a new kind of how do you say, creativity to what is being said on the streets. And of course, because of pandemic restrictions, we have to be creative in a way they protest. Sometimes people have to protest in their homes, sometimes they do it over internet, it's not only on the streets. But because of the pandemic restrictions, and because of the law and justice being not really a party that defends law or justice, the police has been really badly treating people, and there are a lot of cases of people under 18 being taken to the police stations, of people being given fines for really stupid things like littering, or I don't know, using the loudspeakers on the street. So it quickly turned out that we needed to organize legal help. And at first I thought it would be just for 1 day or 2 days, but then it turned out that it's going to be for 2 months. So my phone number is now all over our region, and people keep calling because we provide them legal help. We assign them attorneys who assist them at the police stations and at the court. And we try to keep record of these cases. So just to wrap up, because I can see that my time is already finished, I just want to mention the involvement of the member of the parliaments of the left, but also of other parties, that they are all the time on the streets taking care that, or taking care, basically controlling how the police is acting, because the police also started using tear gas on the streets and started to also attack people physically for no reason. So our MPs are there to defend people basically with their own bodies sometimes, but they also help to contact the victims with the attorneys, because the police tends to restrict that. And another way, of course, also of helping is that the bill that we proposed of the making abortion legal up to 12 weeks will now be this kind of civil bill where 100,000 signatures have to be collected. So the idea is that we show how many people in fact want this bill to go into reality. And we are of course very grateful for the support that we receive internationally, be it symbolic, like the resolution of the European Parliament, or more practical, like the laws that are introduced in Sweden and Iceland about the access to abortion for Polish women who are denied it in Poland. And I think that what we need most from you is to share the news of what is happening in Poland, and to talk to people, to anyone, to your family, to your colleagues, about what is going on in Poland, to share the footage, because what is happening here is really outrageous, and I don't think I've seen anything like this before in my life, or even my parents who lived in the communism. So we're very, very grateful for the support that we're already receiving, and we're hoping that it will also change what happens next. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorota, and I'm sure I speak for everyone to say it's a real honour to have you here this morning and to hear from you directly. And obviously we've been following the struggle of our sisters over in Poland and watching everything that's going on there. And there is no social justice without women's rights being centred, and also women's sexual and reproductive rights and gender rights. And of course, this also focus on trans people and trans women's rights as well. And also a huge congratulations to all of you for what you're doing there, and also just to reference what happened in Argentina as well. So we know across the world women's rights are being rowed back. When we see fascism marching, this is what happens. So yeah, so huge respect to you and everyone for what you're doing. Thank you for being here again. So we will now hand over to Natalie.
Thanks very much, Shyster, and thanks everyone for being here, and it's great to be on such a great panel. Clive started off by referring to the sad one-year anniversary. I want to go back a little bit further, because 5 years ago it was the end of the Paris climate talks, and there's so much happened, it seems like it was a lifetime ago. But I was looking at a video I made on the Eurostar back from Paris, and we've kind of forgotten now, but what happened in the Paris climate talks was we got the 1.5 degree target, which was actually better than anyone had started the Paris talks with. And looking at myself on that video on the Eurostar, I'm buoyant, I'm up, I'm joyful, I'm hopeful. And that really is one of the things I want to focus on, because I think what we often don't do in the left, broadly speaking, is we don't celebrate our victories enough. We don't recognise how far we've come. So it's really great with all the speakers on the panel here to look at the amazing movements that have been built in Poland and Belarus. And, you know, as a feminist since age 5, it's great to see so many women, you know, in such leading positions in both of those situations. And the IWGB, I was just looking back actually, 5 years ago in 2015, I was speaking at when one of the first organising rallies, first pickets for the bicycle couriers, the cycle couriers. And that was an amazing day where the cleaners from the University of London, who I knew from their campaigns, came along with their drums. They're they make a great deal of noise at any protest. And we had women cleaners from a Latin American background. They're supporting the London bicycle couriers, who are mostly young men. And it was interesting to see groups coming together. And that's one of the things I really want to focus on, because I think we have to celebrate our victories, which we just don't do enough. Often we don't get a full victory. We don't get everything we want. And so we tend to immediately say, even after we've won something, we start saying, oh, but we didn't get exactly what we wanted. We need to really get across to people the idea that, hey, campaigning works. That's the hashtag I use, campaigning works. And, if I look back to that 2015 video from Paris, I was talking about how we had to stop fracking. We've stopped fracking in the UK, particularly England was the last place we stopped it. But we haven't really celebrated that victory, and we need to show people that getting together works. And that's one of the things I think we've learned from the last 5 years, perhaps relearned, is the importance of emotion in politics. We often tend to, and I know the Green Party is particularly prone to this, we get terribly into great detailed policies, wonderful ideas, how amazing things can be. But what we really have to do is show people that there's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life, and for nature and the environment, the climate to be looked after, if we just share those resources out fairly. And hope, I very much believe, has to be and is our emotion. That's our message. And politics, really, everyone always comments on how polarised politics is, and we have a far-right government in the UK. We have far too many far-right governments around the world, and politics is split between people who are broadly on our side and the far right, which basically says, oh, it's a dangerous, difficult world, and we've got to grab what we can for us and ours and shove those others away, whoever those others are, build walls to keep them out, put nets in the channel to keep the migrant boats away. We really have to focus on hope and be very cautious about fear, because fear just plays into the hands of the other side, I would suggest. And what we've got to do is, the climate emergency, I think we've come a long way in those 5 years in understanding that there are many, many super policies that we can deliver that make people's lives better. We're currently trashing the planet and creating a thoroughly miserable society. Levels of mental ill health, levels of insecurity, precarity, poverty, inequality. And run a little thought experiment for a second. Imagine we created this wonderful, amazing society, and then we discovered that we actually had to, what we were doing was trashing the climate, and we'd have to change everything. Now that would be really politically difficult. But for us now to say, well, what we're doing now is not working, and we're offering you this hope, this vision thing, policies like universal basic income, policies like encouraging walking and cycling and supporting people to use public transport, making sure it's affordable, etc. Warm, comfortable, affordable heat home for everyone. These are climate policies, but they're also very much people policies. They're super policies that work for both. And I wrote a little piece for The Independent this morning about the Paris anniversary, and it didn't surprise me to see that that there's lots of different people writing 200 words, and they've got scientists and that. And I was the only one who said, well, what's the chief thing we've got to do in the next 5 years? We've got to break the power of the entrenched interests, the 1%. Big oil, big tobacco, the media tycoons, the IT, our social media tycoons. They are the greatest barrier to progress, both political and in terms of climate, in terms of our economy and society. So I want to sort of make this nicely circular by sort of getting to where Clive got to as well, which is looking at, if you ask me a question about what's the answer to anything, I will ultimately come back to democracy. If you ask me to come and talk about algae, I'll find a way to get democracy in there somewhere. Because we have to, if we think back to the referendum in 2016, the Brexit referendum, the winning slogan, the winning emotion, the feeling, was people said they wanted to take back control. And people, I said at the time, and I've been saying ever since, they were absolutely right to want to take back control of their local communities. We have the most centralised government in Europe, with all of the power concentrated in Westminster, and local councils struggle to just keep the wolf from the door to survive and not collapse. We need to give people power, decision-making power locally, and step up and power should be only referred upwards when necessary. Of course, we need a parliament that reflects the will of the people, but we also need climate assemblies, people's assemblies locally to make decisions. So there is, I think, a dangerous tendency around at the moment. Some people are saying, oh, it's all a mess, and so sort of someone has to step in and take over. But I want to finish this section with a message of hope, to say that what we are seeing is all sorts of wonderful things happening at a local level, happening with bicycle couriers, organising, happening with women in Poland, happening with the democracy movement in Belarus. Here in the UK, and Clive said, oh, it's really difficult because we haven't got control centrally. That's true, but we can take control, people can take control in their communities. What we have to do is give people the message that politics should be what you do, not have done to you. And so if people feel empowered and in control, they get together and they do things and they change things. And, very old saying, we are the many, they are the few. They're called the 1%. They're really the 0.1%. People en masse getting together and working together can make a difference. And just one final thought to add, thinking about emotion, let's also think about caring for each other and being kind to each other. We want to do that with refugees. We want to do that with everyone who needs our help. But sometimes we're so passionate and so concerned, and we think we've got the most important cause, we've got the way we think we know how to do it. And other people are taking on different causes and doing different things. Let's put all our causes together and see that what we're all doing is working together, and maybe we're using different means in different directions. But what's really important, that when we don't allow ourselves to be set against each other, but that we reach out, support, care for each other, be kind. So be powerful, but be kind. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie, and thanks for ending on that very hopeful note, and also kind of connecting what everybody so far has said on the panel. We will come back to the panel before we end this session, but this is the members' conference. So what we want to do is ask those of you who want to ask a question to raise your hands in the chat. Obviously, because of Zoom, we don't have a lot of time, so if we can all just try and share the space and time collectively. We really would like your comments or questions, but please, can we ask you to keep them very short and no more than a minute, which I know is difficult, but if we try and do that, then we'll be able to hear it from as many of you as we possibly can. So if you raise your hands if you would like to say anything or to ask a question. So the first person I can see here is Mike, is it Crimes?
Hi, I think this has been a great group of speakers. I think the question I'd like to ask really is, what can people do most to help the democracy movement in Belarus? Because it's obviously the least tangible for most of us, most difficult really to speak to people there. So really what we could do to help there, apart from just talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We'll come to the panel once we've got a few more questions. Now, can I ask Mary, the lovely Mary, to ask your question or make a comment?
Hello. Okay, I can't. I think I've unmuted myself, but you have to unvideo me, Shyster.
Okay, well, we can hear you, Mary, so if you want to go ahead and we'll see if we can see you. If you
Don't
ask
worry.
a question.
Well, anyway, it was really great to have both Dorota and Lizabetta here, and we're all in great support of your struggles. But I had a very specific question for Dorota, which is, Angela Merkel has just made a compromise with the Polish and Hungarian governments. For people who haven't been following it, they were threatening to veto the new recovery plan if it was linked to rule of law conditionality. And now she's sort of postponed it. And I wanted to know what Dorota felt about that and what she thought the European Union should be doing.
Thank you, Mary. We'll come to you, Dorota, after we've had a few more questions. Next up, I can see Ben's hand raised. Ben, do you want to come in, please?
Hi. Yeah, thanks to the speakers. I guess following the first comment from Mike, the thing that's sprung out for me most in Lizavetta's contribution was, in terms of what we in other countries can do, was the Norwegian workers in the business that's the potash miners' biggest customer, taking action in solidarity. You know, capitalism is globalized. That's not going away. But what it means is that these struggles aren't distant, right? They're linked to our workplaces. They're linked to our high streets. And I think we need to bring back the sort of radical traditions in internationalist trade unionism, that they still exist, right? And you know, the film Ne Passerang came out a couple of years ago about the Scottish factory workers who grounded Pinochet's jets. We had French and Italian dockers last year blocking arms exports to Saudi for use in the war in Yemen. What I think we need to be doing is organizing in our workplaces, if they're not already organized, and looking at where our workplaces are linked to abuses, human rights abuses, workers' rights abuses around the world. So that goes for Belarus, that goes for the genocide of the Uyghur people in China, and many other struggles. We have that power. Nothing in these supply chains, and it is almost always about profit and power, which means that our supply chains that we work in, those abuses depend on them, and we can have an impact.
And thank you. Sorry to cut you off, but thank you very much for your very important points and your question. And thanks for connecting all the injustices and the need for action and solidarity, and connecting that with workers and trade unions as well. So really appreciate your points and your comments, and thank you. Next up, I can't actually see any more. I can see Fred. Fred, would you like to come in? And then I think Felicity, did you have your hand up? It's gone now, but if you did, if you want to come in after Fred. Fred, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Briefly, two questions and comments really interlinked in terms of what the internationalist left should think about. And of course, Britain is not like Belarus with the savage attack of the riot police and paramilitaries on democracy protesters. However, we've been sold a pup, or the country's been sold a pup with Brexit in terms of democracy and sovereignty. And we're now seeing an attack on the democracy of the devolved governments, centralisation of government over the NHS and local authorities and so on and so forth. So I just want to hear what the panel's thoughts are on this in terms of how we can link up the fight for democracy, which is under attack because of the rise of the far right and English nationalists in this country. Secondly, I'm glad Natalie mentioned very strongly climate, because next year we've got the COP26 conference in Glasgow, and I think that's something that the left across Europe and in Britain in particular need to put really high up on the agenda and mobilise. So I'd be grateful to hear what your thoughts are in terms of Belarus, Poland, etc., whether that's already on your agenda and how we can cooperate. And I know Clive's a great supporter of the climate and environmental movement as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. And Felicity, if we come to you next.
Thanks. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm bringing greetings from Left Unity and the Party of the European Left. I really liked it when Clive started with the list of crises, but I do think we should emphasise as well that this is a crisis for women. That in every aspect of what we're facing, women are at the front, and women with their children facing gross poverty in this country as well. But the point I want to make is that as we move into this real melee of either, an actual no deal Brexit, we are going to see, a ramping up of anti-migrant rhetoric. And I think that we have to be ready with a real onslaught in return in terms of solidarity with migrants living here, both on social media and, if necessary, with posters that can be put up around the country. I think we really need to answer that, to stop it, so that you imagine yourself taking your kids to school and having the kids being told they should be going home now, as happened immediately after the Brexit, vote. So can we please think about how we kind of mobilize everybody that we can in defense of migrants living here? And one final thing, that in the context of the pandemic, we need to look at making sure everybody has access to testing and everybody has access to medical care, and that isn't happening at the moment on the basis of migration rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicity, for your question. Thanks to all of you for your questions. We will now go over to the panel. I'm going to ask you to do the impossible, which is to try and sum up, answer some of those questions if possible, or take on board the comments when you're responding, and to just take maximum 2 minutes, I've been told. Well, I was told a minute. I'm going to be a bit cheeky, give you an extra minute, a bit cheeky like that. So Clive, if I go to you first, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, there you go. So I mean, there are lots of points that have been raised there. I disagree with none of them. I think one of the problems that we've got at the moment is we're in a target-rich environment. We're under attack from so many places, whether it's migrants' rights, whether it's attacks on trade unions, on workers, on the environment. And I guess one of the things that I kind of feel intrinsically is that what we have to understand is we have to understand what the causes of those problems are. And there are multiple causes, but what I find we tend to do is, in our silos, fight the symptoms. And to me, whether you're a great advocate of parliamentary democracy or not, I think everyone can fundamentally agree that there is a crisis of democracy. There's a crisis of democracy in Belarusian, there's a crisis of democracy in Poland, there's a crisis of democracy here in the United Kingdom. It's happening, one in the United States as well. And I think if you understand what's happened over the past 40 years about how neoliberalism is fundamentally anti-democratic and how the left has failed to challenge that in any meaning or constructive way for so long, what we're now seeing is the second phase of that. And they're coming for now the liberal institutions which were eroded and hollowed out over those last 40 years. Here, I'm talking about this country and Western democracies. It's a slightly different picture in Poland, which had come out of the back end of a totalitarian system and then into this. But here in the so-called more developed Western democracies, we are now facing a situation where I think we're on the cusp of something far darker. And I'm not trying to be dramatic or melodramatic in this, but I think if you look at the picture, if you look at what's happening around the globe, there are some countries that are further on than others, but it's happening here as well. So if we have that analysis of what is going wrong, then we can start to work out what it is we need to do to put it right. And I think that means deepening our democracy. It means trusting in people, decentralizing power. It means understanding that the Labour Party is part of the solution. It's also part of the problem sometimes, but it is part of the solution. But actually what we need to be doing is taking our experiences, our organizing ability, our educational capacity, and going out into civil society, going out into campaigns, showing solidarity and helping people organize, helping educate people. I think if we spend all our energies navel gazing, and I think that's unhelpful. So I guess the bottom line is have the correct analysis. And I think also as well, change our culture here on the left, especially. I think Natalie Bennett was just summed it up in be kind. And it's a really difficult thing. We talk about a better world, another Europe. We often do it by screaming and shouting at people. But I understand the anger and the frustration, but I think the thing that's coming out of this for me is that we have to be better ourselves. We have to enable that ourselves. And I think ultimately be kind, have an analysis of what's going wrong, and organize both inside the Labour Party, but also more importantly, outside of it.
Thank you, as always, Clive. Liza, I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah, thank you. To answer the questions that I got, how you can support the Belarusian unions, for example. Yeah, it's true that it's always good to have a look at the supply chain of the UK-based companies, for example, and to put pressure on those companies so that they, in their turn, put pressure on the Belarusian companies that they run business with. There's recently been an appeal done by human rights organizations and the independent unions in Belarus to all interested parties to actually ask international companies to put pressure on Belarusian companies. I will share it a bit later. I can't find it at the moment. Pete Radcliffe already posted here the Labour Start campaign, which is still going on. You can take part in this campaign, and it will automatically generate a letter to Belarusian government, to Belarusian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, saying that you are aware of what is going on in Belarus and you care about it. Question about climate and environment, if it is in the agenda of Belarusian unions, yes, it is. And talking about energy, I should mention here that recently the dictator started the work of the nuclear power station on the border with Lithuania, and it works with brakes, and we are really terrified of what might happen. And unions, of course, were against this nuclear power station. Let's see what will happen, but it looks like a grenade in the hands of the cycle. Yeah, that is terrible.
Yeah,
and we know that there are no borders of.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. Apologies.
And also, Sasha mentioned that the attacks on the right for strike is a shame of the unions. We actually are losing to the employers, to big companies who don't want us to go on strikes. In Belarus, there exists a law on strikes, but in reality, not a single strike is possible because this dictator can postpone it for 3 months, for example. So it will never happen. Of course, it's in the agenda as well, and we are going to put more. My English is we have to continue with putting forward our agenda and on strikes as well, because it's the best peaceful tool in the hands of the workers, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Liza. Henry, can we go to you next, please?
Yeah, can you just repeat the question, sorry?
I just wanted you to take just 2 minutes just to wrap up, and also if you want to respond to any of the points that were raised by the members or any of the questions that you picked up on. Otherwise, if you just want to wrap up.
Yeah, basically, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody. I think we really need to be working harder than we have done already. You know, when at the moment, things that are going on, things that are going to happen later are a really difficult situation. We are in the IWGB are working really hard despite the pandemic. This pandemic has hit us very hard because we were already fighting for better conditions, fighting for better wages, helping workers who were exploited. But now things have exacerbated. We have to fight companies, billionaires, who have managed to put people on furlough, but they don't want. Things like that, that is shameful. And one of the campaigns we had where we had another Europe supporting us was in 5 Heffler Street, which is a Porsche club, where we were fighting for better wages, better conditions for migrant workers, mostly, and those people that were working in the kitchen were European citizens. And the people who were going there to that club were billionaires, MPs, Tories, who were proposing Brexit to get rid of our migrants. So this is something that is happening in the country. It's an example of what happened in the country. It's about billionaires trying to make more money and blaming migrants and still using migrants for the benefit. And I think we need to, as I said, we need to work harder and we need to support each other more. And from the IWGB, I would really appreciate if everybody can support our campaigns for couriers, for cleaners, for foster carers, for some of the most vulnerable workers in society. So please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, follow us our campaigns, and I'm sure we can make a change as we have done before. Natalie was talking about cleaners in the University of London. Just this year, we managed to secure cleaners, security guards, receptionists, porters, audiovisual in-house. After a 10 years campaign, which shows that things are possible, that they can do it, but unless we force them, unless we campaign for it, unless we shame them, they are not going to do it. So we can do changes, and we can do big changes. We still have campaigns going on. We won in Goldsmith, we brought security in the house. We now have a campaign at the Greenwich University, and for that, we need your support. Everything has been possible with the support of everybody, and I hope we can continue fighting, campaigning, organizing together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the important reminder of how solidarity and action works, and what change comes when we put that solidarity into action. Okay, Dorota, we're coming over to you next.
There's a lot to refer to, but I'll just try to focus on 3 issues. And if I miss any questions from the chat, I'll just put my email address there so you can send it to me and I'll answer by email. I want to refer to what Clive said, that we are asking for a new kind of politics, for another Europe, but we're screaming. And I don't think there's an opposition in that we can, like one of the main words that we use in our protest is fuck off, to basically everyone from, from the old kind of politics, fuck off the patriarchy. And, so we are of course rude in that sense, and we are radical in the fact that we're, going up the streets and screaming bad words. And we are constantly as women, of course, told that this is, not the way we should behave, and we should be nice and kind and, try and negotiate and be more likely to go on a compromise. So I think we can be radical on the streets and radical with our expectations, but at the same time, there's a lot of what Natalie said, a lot of kindness and a lot of caring about each other, and a lot of building relationships and a solidarity, also between the big cities and the small towns, the so-called province, who is now also rising, which is also hasn't been seen for many years. So we're all the time trying to, be radical in this politics of care for one another, because we know it's a long fight, and otherwise we will just not manage for such a long time. And there's of course much more empathy if someone is not making it, is not able to, participate in everything all the time and to the same extent, because people are just basically in 2020 mentally wrecked. So yeah, Argentina is now just really bringing us hope, because they've been fighting for many years, longer than us, and to read it in the news is really like heartwarming. But also there was a question, how to fight far right. I'm afraid that my main answer is that we need money, because for us in Women's Strike or in the Razem, if we want to have a campaign, like outdoor campaign, billboards, we raise money for it, and maybe we have 1 or 2 billboards in a city. And just last week, the far right, the conservative organizations started a campaign that is basically everywhere, all around the country. Like on every street, there is this pro-life poster. And, I don't know if we can have more money than them, but to really raise awareness in society, we need access to the media. We need to spread our narrative in social media, but also in the public space. And this just costs money. So yeah, that's the reality. I also wanted to refer to the question about the EU budget. Yeah, it's hard to tell, because it was kind of power play of our government that they will veto it or they will die, and that the bad European Union wants to kill us and so on, and we will survive and we will not surrender to them. So now, of course, there's a triumph that they managed to sustain our autonomy, but at the same time keep the money. So well, maybe there's a hope that now that the compromise is done, they will stop talking about exiting European Union. because this has already been becoming a topic recently in the media, that we should leave. And this is really, really worrying. But at the same time, we know that what was agreed in Brussels will probably not stop them from breaking women's rights and LGBT plus people rights. So yeah, it's hard to be optimistic, I would say, but as it was said before, we should focus on hope rather than fear. So let's give that message. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorota. And I know for many, you are a symbol of hope and the movement there in Poland. So thank you very much for everything you're doing, and thanks for being here again. Natalie, I'm going to ask you to say the final few words for this session, please.
Okay, well, I'm going to briefly 2 points, bouncing off all those excellent contributions and discussions. And I was pleased that Ben mentioned the Uyghurs in China, because if we look around the world, that's one of the huge human rights abuses, a genocide that's going on right now. And one of the things that I kind of got drafted into, and I wouldn't have predicted I was doing, is I'm co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Hong Kong. And of course, what we have there is, we've had 1 million people on the streets in Hong Kong trying to defend their democratic rights. And I come back to my point about joining things up. And we've done, what every part of politics has traditionally done, as used human rights and democracy as a stick to beat the people we don't like anyway. And we've tended to leave our friends alone, not mention them, just quietly turn the other way. And one of the things that I think we really have to focus on is human rights are universal, and we have to defend them everywhere in the world. And that creates models, create pictures. So one of the things we've seen is the British government has basically said to the people of Hong Kong, having barred them back in the Hong Kong handover, are now saying, well, you can come to the UK. And now if they're creating orderly, organised routes for people from Hong Kong to seek asylum in the UK, well, how can you not do that for everyone else as well? So if we make rights universal, if we insist on rights being universal, and criticise, people who might be our friends for other reasons, as well as those who we identify as the enemy, let's say those rights are universal. And if we want a safe, secure world, what we have to do is fight for those human rights everywhere. And I think the word security is really crucial. And Felicity was talking about the impact of COVID-19. And it's exposed the extreme weaknesses of our society. It hasn't really caused them, it's simply exposed them. And I think we have to take the word security back from the right. They talk about security and they mean guns and authoritarian force and, goodness help us, nuclear weapons. We know security comes from everyone being able to put food on the table, keep a roof over their head, being able to freely express their views, being able to have a say in how the world around them works. That's what we're working towards. And we have to do that without fear or favour all around the world, and support people all around the world who are doing that. So we're likely to see a very big influx, I suspect, of people from Hong Kong coming in, having fought for democracy there. Let's make sure we embrace them, encourage them, support them, help them. They may not always share our views on lots of other things. They come from a very different political environment. But let's reach out, care, support, and say that human rights, the right to food, the right to shelter, these are universal rights, as is the right to democracy and the right to simply speak your mind. And Dorota, we were talking about being kind to each other. I think the right of being able to express your anger loudly and clearly against what's wrong in society, that's terribly important as well. So let's be kind to each other and be strong in standing up in resistance. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Natalie. And so just to conclude then, this panel has been incredible. Thank you for bringing all your experiences, lived realities, and expertise and professionalism to the panel. The great Audre Lorde said, there is no thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And that's pretty much what we've been hearing this morning from the panel. We are living in incredible times, as we know. This is the year of COVID-19, the year of the Black Lives Matter movement being reinvigorated. We've seen the absolute total laying bare of truth in relation to the gross inequity in this country and across Europe. We've seen the far right marching everywhere, but we're also seeing them being pushed back. We're also seeing the curtailing of women's rights, LGBTQI people's rights, trans women's rights in particular, but we're also seeing a pushback. So alongside all the horror that we're seeing, we have to, as Natalie said at the beginning of the panel, celebrate our wins. We have to celebrate our collective wins, and we have to stand in active solidarity with each other, and we have to basically campaign to win. That's what we have to do, and we are going to do that. Generations have done it before us, and you know, we're doing our best to do it now. So I just want to thank the panel again. So thank you, Clive, Liza, Henry, Dorota, and Natalie. And you can all stay connected with the panel by following them online and on Twitter. So thanks to Another Europe is Possible for organising this session. I'm going to hand over now to Alina, and apologies for being slightly delayed, Alina, with the next session. Thank you.
That's all right, Shaista. You've done a brilliant job.